Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Hunter Killer by Ross Buzzell. Narrated by Todd Mclaren. 1. Assess the situation. Warning lights flashed red throughout the ship. Lance marched through the corridor as crew members ran to their battle stations. Reaching the hangar, the captain approached its weapons locker and grabbed his usual loadout. Checking his weapon, he approached their Tatlev dropship as the Svikari fighter was gearing up for deployment. Valdivia stood at the craft's entrance, her shotgun in hand and pistol on her thigh. Lance stopped as he saw the Jarog. "This isn't something you're ready for," Lance said with a shake of his head.
"I've been in firefights before,"
Val countered. "Against wildlife, robots, and pirates. Never against a unified military force," Lance countered. "This isn't something you're ready for."
"Then I'll stay behind Dexter," she argued. "I'm not letting you go in there alone, especially with Lincoln being involved."
"I'm not alone. I have my team."
"A team that'll do whatever you say without hesitation, even if you're emotionally compromised. I'm going with you to make sure you all keep your heads."
Valdivia turned and climbed into the ship. Lance shook his head and followed. Every member of Raffin's squad was armed to the teeth and strapped into their seats. The captain moved to the cockpit and sat on the weapons officer chair. Securing himself, he ran a weapons check. Everything was green. "Justin, how long until we stop jump?" Lance asked.
30 seconds, the pilot replied. "And be ready. The sensors are all over the place. This is going to be a hot drop."
"Copy that," Lance said as he activated the ship's defenses. "Weapons are green and hull is polarized. We are good for drop."
"Coming out of blink space in 3, 2, 1,
Justin called out over the ship-wide PA system. A low thud reverberated through the ship. In a flash, the hangar doors flew open. Both the Tatlev and Svikari fighter dropped out from under the Gladius. Blinding flares erupted from the corvette as it broke away from the dropships. Scott dove and pulled away, passing through the wall of glowing fire. The radar jumped to life with dozens of red dots. The polarized hull let out several low thumps with inbound fire. As Lance's eyes adjusted, swarms of Valus and Reeve fighters engaged human ships. The captain squeezed the trigger as a ship flew in front of them. A line of metal, accelerated to a percentage of the speed of light, tore through the cockpit windscreen. It shattered, pulling the pilots out and causing the ship to slam into a passing Reeve vessel. A space station twice the size of the Manifest Destiny opened fire in all directions with its defensive platforms. Scott pulled the ship's yoke starboard, threading them between two fleeing human fighters. Lance took a deep breath, focusing himself. His finger twitched. Several rounds slammed into the oncoming Valus crafts. As they broke off their pursuit, Lance dropped several mines while Scott spun. 2 red dots vanished from the radar.
"What on earth is going on here?"
Justin shouted, as he made a defensive run over the research station. "No idea. Can anyone confirm if the Reeves and Valus are fighting each other?" Lance asked. "They aren't," Lincoln spliced into their communications. "They attacked as a joint force." Scott closed the ship's windscreen armor, activating external cameras. Missile lock sirens sounded within the craft.
"You've got 3 inbound," the Svikari fighter shouted.
"Try spinning. That's a good trick," Lance ordered. Without missing a beat, Scott entered a barrel roll before descending into an aileron roll. After a few seconds, the missile lock sirens cut off.
"Your 6 is clear,"
the other fighter replied.
"You aren't moving in to defend,"
Scott replied. The Tatlev banked to port and slammed on the brakes. Their Svikari fighters shot past them with 4 enemy fighters on their tail. Scott hit the gas again and turned the ship to get behind the 3 Reeve and 1 Valus craft. Lance opened fire. Blue light flashed in an oval around the Reeve ships while sparks flew from the Valus craft. The impact sent the enemy human craft out of position, where an Allied fighter collided with it. The Reeve shielding shattered on two of the others, just as excess debris slammed into one, forcing it to spin out and slam into the space station. With another burst, Lance took out the other unshielded ship. As the last craft attempted to break off, the Gladius slammed into it, causing both the shield and the last bogey to explode. The captain took a deep breath as his stomach jumped into his throat. Scott yanked back on the yoke. The ship revved as its nose pulled up, narrowly maneuvering around the corvette. Diving around the back side of the ship, the pilot pulled up and hugged the bottom of the space station.
"What are you doing?"
Lance shouted to Justin.
"Killing everything I can,"
the pilot countered. "We're losing our defensive fighters," Lincoln called out. "We don't have reinforcements close enough to assist."
"Copy that,"
Lance shouted as he shot at a few more fighters that attempted to swarm them.
"How thick is that station's armor?"
"Strong enough to tank a direct asteroid hit," Lincoln replied. "What are you thinking?"
"Get everyone to the inner portions of the ship and tell everyone to retreat,"
Lance ordered.
"We can take them,"
Justin called out.
"You may be able to, but I'm getting beat up out here,"
the Spicari fighter pilot called.
"He's right, Justin. Fall back," Lance ordered. "If you can get anyone on the Gladius, pick them up." "You want to tell me what you're thinking?"
Scott asked, as he weaved between several other fighters. "It's a little trick I used at the slingshot during the First Contact War," Lance replied. Silence fell over all radios.
"Who's a what now?"
Stephanie shouted from the back.
"You're not being serious, are you?"
Justin's voice crackled over the radio.
"Yee-haw! We gonna nuke some bad guys!"
Dexter screamed from the hold.
"Broken arrow!"
Lincoln screamed over the radio.
"We have a broken arrow!"
Instantly, what remained of the station's defensive forces turned tail and gunned it away from the main ship. Several enemy fighters started to follow them. Justin plowed through several other ships. The Gladius's thick hull obliterated the smaller ships with barely a scratch. Scott flew the opposite direction. A few red dots followed. Lance dropped half of the mines, making the blips vanish. The pilot whipped around to see the station dozens of miles away. The glint of the swarm of enemy crafts opening fire on the research station reminded the captain of a swarm of fireflies. Lance quickly calculated the explosive yield of his shot. Locking onto a piece of debris floating a few hundred yards away from the station, the captain squeezed the trigger. A small, glowing white dot flew out of the front of the ship. Silence filled the battlefield as the little piece of antimatter fluttered through the darkness of space. Lance held his breath as he leaned forward in his seat. A small blip of light pinged right where he was aiming, before vanishing. A split second later, an explosion of white light erupted violently in every direction. The wave incinerated every ship caught in its wave. Even with the video compensators dimming the light, Lance still squinted as the orb dissipated into tails of plasma. The accompanying EMP caused the radar to flicker for several seconds. The radio channels died, turning to static while the lights flickered. Quiet settled over the field of battle once more as the captain leaned forward. "Clear 'em out," he ordered. Scott accelerated toward the debris field. Dexter erupted in an ear-piercing cheer. The light glinted off the enemy ships that were still intact and drifting in space. "No one escapes," Lance ordered, as he sent several bursts toward the stunned ships. "Destroy the Reeves! Disable the Valus! I want answers!"
"I hate it when you do that,"
Justin shouted, as the Gladius re-engaged as well. Those that were far enough away to survive the blast were blinded from the explosion, judging by their erratic flight patterns. Lance took out as many engines as he could while using the rest of his mines to blow up Reeve fighters before they could come back online. Fewer enemy ships survived than Lance anticipated, causing their cleanup to take less time than anticipated. By the time they were done, the radio channels flickered back to life. Lance connected with his brother's frequency. "We're all cleared up out here," Lance shouted. "Lottie freaking da," Lincoln countered. "They're still overrunning the inside of this ship. Not sure how much longer we can hold out." "Where are the hangars?" Lance asked. "Can't. They're booby-trapped. Anything in or out, and they detonate," Lincoln replied. "What about airlocks?" "Jammed."
"How about emergency maintenance hatches?"
Stephanie shouted from the back. "Yeah, what about emergency maintenance hatches?" Lance echoed. "We've got one of those. Sending you the coordinates. There'll only be enough space for one ship, though," Lincoln warned. "Don't worry," Lance replied. "We've got Raffen Squad in one ship." "Then bring the power of Odin. They're cutting through every door. I'm locking on them." A blue dot pinged on the outer hull of the space station. Lance transferred the weapon controls to Scott and unbuckled himself. "Once the maintenance hatch is sealed, break away and get as much distance between us as possible," Lance ordered. "There could be another wave inbound, and we'll need this ship's guns." "We don't have enough fuel to do another one of those antimatter shots," Scott warned. "That's not a bad thing," Lance replied, as he moved into the hold. Lance moved to a control panel as he summoned his suit's helmet. He swiped at it and summoned the Raffen JJ systems. The floor slid open, and up rose the exoskeletons, all colored to match the squad's armor, with one being a dark pink. Valdivia was the first to unstrap and step into her exoskeleton. It clipped into her armor seamlessly. Dexter was quick to follow, as was Stephanie. Matthias backed into it at the same time Lance did. It clipped into place and ran a diagnostic as both suit and jump jet system synced to one another.
"Showing all green on melding,"
Valdivia called out. "I'm green too," said Matthias. "Likewise," Dex added.
"Same,"
Stephanie chimed in. "Good. Scott, how close are we to touchdown?" Lance asked.
10 meters,
the pilot called back. "Good. Justin, anything on long-range scanners?"
"They're still coming back online. Nothing on medium range, though,"
Justin replied.
"We'll keep you posted if anything funky starts to go down."
"Good. And send out an SOS to both SOAT and human expeditionary forces. See if there's anyone close enough to get us out of here," Lance ordered.
"Already working on it,"
Justin replied. "Copy that," Lance said, as the ship shuddered. The captain walked past his squad. Kneeling, he pulled up a floor panel to reveal the emergency airlock. A red light flashed next to the door for several seconds. Several low-pitched whines emanated from the circular door. After several low chunks, the light turned green. Lance grabbed the airlock door and pulled on it. It opened into the ship. The inner door remained shut as an external atmospheric gauge measured the Tatlev's internal pressure. It dinged, causing the inner door to unlock. Pressing on the gauge caused the airlock to hiss and slide open. A tube 15 feet long stretched out below them. It opened near the bottom into another airlock room. Lance stood up, readied his rifle, and looked at his team. "We don't know who knows what. If you can spare someone, do it," Lance said. "Even though it may be against my better judgment, we need to figure out who's able to make the Reeves and Valus work together." "Can we destroy all the robots at least?" Dexter asked. Lance cracked a smile. "Yippee-ki-yay," he muttered, before jumping down the hole. 2. Sitrep. The rest of Raffen's squad landed behind Lance as he approached the internal airlock. Once inside, the hatch behind them closed and locked, sealing them in the research station. Turning to his multi-tool, the captain tried to get a read on his brother's location. Static overcame both his bracer and minimap. "Keep sharp. Maps are being jammed," Lance said, before connecting a channel to Scott. "We're inside and the hatch is sealed. You're good to go."
"Copy that,"
Scott replied through heavy static. Several deep thuds rang from above them as the Tatlev detached. Lance took his place at the frame of the sealed door. Matthias moved in behind him, with Dexter taking the back, and Val keeping her distance behind them. "You're up," Lance said to Stephanie. The engineer moved toward the door. Pulling her newest iteration of Marty off her hip, she set the CD-sized robot on the door. It clamped on and started to click and whir. Stephanie stepped back and raised her rifle. Lance shouldered his weapon, lining up the sights. He took several deep breaths as he steadied himself for the breach. Marty beeped twice before falling to the ground. It scuttled back to Stephanie before beeping again. As it did, the door slid open. Lance's training kicked in. Breaching the door, he broke left as Stephanie moved in behind him and turned right, with Matthias and Dexter taking the center of the room. He lowered his weapon. Dozens of scientists were huddled into the room. Some were injured, but all looked terrified. Lincoln leaned back from behind a console with his hand on the device. He cracked a wide smile. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" he called out. "I'd come over there to greet you, but if I take my hand off this panel, they're going to open every door in this facility and we're all done for." "It's going that well, huh?" Lance asked, as he walked over to his brother. With a shriek, one of the scientists rushed Lance with a scalpel. The soldier took a half-step back, caught the staff member by their wrist, and spun him around before shoving him into the nearby wall, making him drop the weapon. "Seriously, Jared," Lincoln scolded. "Can you not see that they're in SOAT armor, or take, I don't know, physical cues from me, that I'm not going on the offensive, so maybe you shouldn't? Not to mention, you'll never be able to do any real damage with that tiny thing," Dexter added.
"That's what she said,"
Valdivia cut in. Lance closed his eyes and shook his head with a sigh before looking back at the scientist. "Pick up your toy and get back with your colleagues," he ordered, before approaching his brother. "What's our sit rep?" "Not great," Lincoln replied. He pulled up a projection of the ship's internal map. Red dots swarmed the station with high concentrations around the hangar, the engine room, and the hallways leading to them. "That doesn't look great," Lance said, before pointing to the engine room. "I'm assuming they're trying to get in to overload it?" "And they're trying to get us for retrieval," Lincoln added.
$1 million question is, why would the Reeves work alongside the Valus?
Stephanie asked. "They could have figured out how to rewrite them after laying siege to their space station," Lance replied. "But that's the least of our concerns at the moment. What do your ship's internal defenses look like?" Lincoln turned and looked at Raffin's squad before shrugging. "They've wiped out our security forces and have overridden the hallway defensive systems," Lincoln replied. "I had to shut them down to stop them from firing on all of us." Lance nodded as he looked at the station's map. Pursing his lips, he developed a plan. It was more brutal than he'd like, but it was the only way he could see any of them surviving. Pointing at one of the larger groups of intruders that stood between them and the engine room, the captain cleared his throat. "Is that an airlock I see on that deck?" he asked. "Yes. What are you thinking?" Lincoln asked, weariness in his tone. "Open it," Lance replied. "Are you sure?" the cyborg inquired. "Isn't that a little much?" "Yes. But with those numbers we don't stand a chance," Lance countered, before attempting to justify his train of thought to himself. "Even if we get extremely lucky and manage to punch a hole through, they're all dead anyway. At least being spaced will be faster, and likely less painful than bleeding out." "And the Reeves?" Lincoln asked. "They may have been hardened enough to withstand the antimatter explosion, but we've got some things that'll make short work of them. Isn't that right, Dex?" "I can't wait to give this a try," the giant simmered with excitement as he lifted his heavy rifle. "It's a little thing Steph threw together."
It wasn't just thrown together. I've been working on it since the AI war, and you're just the only one big enough to carry around the power cell," she countered.
"I'll wait until you get into position to open the airlock," Lincoln relented. "On your way, might I suggest you focus on taking out this particular unit?" Lincoln highlighted a larger red dot on the ship's map. It was in the center of the team attempting to get to the engines. This is the one that's stopping me from being able to regain control of the ship's electronics, Lincoln pointed out. You take it out, and I'll be able to block off every area in the ship, reactivate the internal defense systems, and put an end to this, and call for the fleet to back us up.
Lance crossed his arms. He shook his head at his brother's suggestion. No. Whoever ordered this attack wanted the artifact and ended up with Amber and Chadavia, Lance replied. If they're going for the engine room, then that means they don't want any survivors. Our best way to figure out who's behind this is to let them think they've succeeded.
You don't have the right to order the destruction of this station,
one of the scientists shouted. Lance turned to look at the small crowd that eyed him down. None of them indicated who spoke up. The captain shook his head. I may not, but strategically speaking, it'll be easier to find the responsible party if they think you're all dead, Lance announced.
And what about you? Lincoln asked. Their fighters are bound to have reported back that the Gladius got involved.
We've disabled their fighters and have our team picking up the ones still alive, Lance replied. I can have one of our dropships pick us up from the opposite side of the station and hide behind its explosion. Let one of the fighters get away and report back to their superiors. If we can track them, all the better.
You were trained well, Lincoln smirked. I'm in for it.
I'm not,
Jared shouted.
No one cares, Jared,
Valdivia countered.
Sit back down.
What she said,
Lincoln added, before turning his attention back to his brother. I'll work on relaying an encrypted message to Justin and your other pilots with this plan. Head on out there and let me know when you're ready for me to vent the corridor. Lance nodded. Turning back to his team, he pointed at Valdivia and Matthias. You two stay here for security. Make sure no one that isn't on our side gets in here, Lance ordered. Valdivia nodded and quickly inspected her weapon. Matthias's shoulders slumped.
I never get picked,
he muttered. It's just because I need Stephanie in case Dexter's gun jams, Lance countered. I promise I'll pick you for the next away mission. Yes, sir, Matthias said, before checking his weapon. The Jarrog and Sniper moved into defensive positions in front of the door. Matthias flipped a metal table with the enthusiasm of a pouting child before kneeling behind it. Lance looked at his brother, raising his brow. You ready? He asked.
Whenever you are.
Preferably sooner rather than later, though, Lincoln replied, nodding toward the map. The swarm moved closer to the blocked-off engine rooms. Lance nodded. Patting his brother on the shoulder, he motioned for Dexter and Stephanie to follow him. Moving toward the door, he formed up next to it with his rifle raised. Deploying his helmet, Dexter moved in behind him, with Stephanie taking the back. We're clear, Lance called out. The door slid open. Lance stepped into the corridor. Instantly he turned around and checked to their left as Dexter stepped out and cleared the right. Without a T-junction, Stephanie backed up her captain's position. Nothing but gray metal stretched out in front of him. We're clear, Lance called out.
Clear,
Dexter added. Lance turned on his heels. Moving his weapon in a downward arc, he then raised it, aiming it to the left of Dexter as he moved past Steph. The engineer lowered her rifle for a split second so she didn't flag her captain. Lance pushed past Dexter. Metallic clicking filled the oddly silent hallway as Marty scuttled across the walls and onto the ceiling, charging ahead of them. He'll keep us posted of any traps, Stephanie explained, maintaining her position at the back of their line. Our close proximity should negate any attempts at jamming his signal. Lance hugged the right wall, moving in a half-crouched position. His steps were as silent as those behind him. He carefully made each movement, as his weaker suit didn't have the same sound dampeners his teammates had. Through weeks of practice, he'd figured out how to be just as quiet, however. Marty stopped at a T-junction, several dozen yards ahead of them. It stuck on the ceiling and spun in circles several times before stopping in place. Several beeps came in through their helmets, causing the static of Lance's minimap to clear for a few seconds. No enemies were tucked away in front of them. Reaching the junction, Lance pied the left side as Dexter moved to the other side of the corridor and pied the right. Both men gave a thumbs up as Stephanie moved into the center of the junction, her weapon at the ready. With a silent hand movement, she let them know they were good to go. Lance rounded the right corner, and keeping his weapon raised, he approached a large steel door. It was sealed shut. Remembering the map his brother showed him, he knew that their enemies were on the other side. Marty scuttled down the wall next to them. It jumped onto Stephanie's shoulder before settling in on her thigh. Lance looked back at Dexter and nodded at the door.
"Chances are the Reeves will be able to magnetize their feet before they're pulled out," Lance whispered. "You'll be up."
Dexter nodded and took his place on the far side of the corridor with his weapon aimed at the door. Lance opened a channel to his brother.
"We're in position," he whispered. "How are things looking on your end?"
"Not great," Lincoln replied. "They're only 2 sections away from the engine room. They're cutting through the doors faster than they should."
"And what are things looking like for the other side of our door?"
Lance asked. "Just as bad," Lincoln answered. "I'm counting another 10 having joined the initial squad holding that area of the ship." Lance looked at his team. He quickly cycled through his HUD and magnetized his boots. Stephanie and Dexter did the same.
"We're strapped in," Lance informed his brother. "When you open that external door, hold it for a few seconds. Then open our door just before you close the hull. It'll give us the best advantage."
"Copy that. Just let me know when," Lincoln replied.
"Now!"
Lance ordered. 3. Push through. A low howl rushed from beyond the door, accompanied by muffled screams. The barrier before them groaned under the internal pressure of the ship against the vacuum on its other side. Lance made a C-grip on the barrel of his rifle with his left hand, pulling his weapon into his shoulder and gripping it so tightly, if he'd still been enhanced, it would have bent his barrel in half.
"Brace yourselves," Lincoln called out. "Opening the door in 3, 2, 1.
The door slid open. Lance threw his entire weight back. Even then, the resulting gale force winds nearly pulled him off his magnetized feet. Reeves lay near prone, their boots magnetic as well, with the pull of the void. As the outer door shut, Lance was able to right himself quickly. He opened fire on the dozens of mobile platforms that started to right themselves. Dexter's cannon whined as it powered up to open fire. Slugs, glowing with electricity, flew from his weapon in blurred lines of blue. As they impacted the Reeves, their bodies jolted and sparked, shutting down even without center mass and headshots. Stephanie opened fire, aiming at the mobile platforms further down the corridor with pinpoint precision. Dexter howled in excitement as he sprayed and prayed. In seconds their path was clear. Dexter's weapon wound down, the whine falling silent before its wielder raised the gun to look at its smoking barrel.
"Ain't it a beautiful sight?" Dexter chuckled.
"Extremely useful. Where was that during the AI wars?" Lance asked, glancing back at Steph.
"What do you think gave me the idea to invent it?" the engineer asked. "The power drain is ridiculous, though. It takes 3 concentrated helium-ion cells to be useful, and they run dry after 30 seconds of sustained fire."
"And how many seconds were you holding the trigger?" Lance asked, as he demagnetized his boots.
"About 20,
Dexter replied.
"I'll save the last burst for our target."
"If we could get our hands on some of that boronite, we could probably power the upgrade indefinitely," Stephanie added.
Lance started down the hallway, double-checking the Reeve corpses as they passed. He turned and scanned the partial hallway, where Lincoln opened the doors. Nothing waited to attack them. "I'm sure you'd find a way to make that work. But my question is, are you really willing to go back to that planet just to get some rocks?"
Sample complete. Ready to continue?